Hello, I'm Anne Moseley. I am the director and curator of the Sangamo Experience, and I've been having these road trips on live for some of them, but then there are others that I've had pre-recorded. And today I actually have a chance to come to you live with some of the new technology that we at the Sangamo Experience have been able to get our hands on and try out. And this is our first live program using a new software. So thank you so much for joining me with this new experience. And if you are new to the Sangamo Experience and the Sangamo Road Trip, I encourage you to check out our website at uis.edu/Sangamo Experience. And as you look through the website and discover more about what we're about, which is the local history of Central Illinois, we're able to discover more about what makes us a community, both the good and the bad, and the unique history that is showcased throughout our Central Illinois past that is a little bit different than Abraham Lincoln. And we're very fortunate at UIS to have both the Sangamo Experience and to have the Center for Lincoln Studies, where you can learn about two different branches of history that are vast. And luckily, there are a lot of different sources here in the Central Illinois area where you'll be able to learn more about those two specific branches of history that are so rich here in Central Illinois. So today I will be talking to you about Curran. If you want to see some of our other stories regarding Central Illinois and the Sangamo road trip, I encourage you to go to our YouTube page, which we're currently streaming on now. And on that page, you'll be able to find all the other locations that we have journeyed to. Now, one of the first locations we had was Chatham, Illinois, and we journeyed to Auburn and Verdon, which is kind of cut in half. It's half Sangamon County, half Montgomery. And then as you move through our journey, we've been able to go to Pawnee, Rochester, Riverton. We told one little story about Spalding, which we have to expand on. And then we journeyed all the way around to Sherman, Williamsville, Pleasant Plains, and now we have finished up New Berlin, and Loami. And now we're in Curran. As we progress in discovering the local history here in Central Illinois, we've only covered some of the stories, very brief. So if there is a town that we talk about and you don't hear a particular story, I encourage you to reach out to us and let us know what your local story is. We love to hear about it. We love to collect them and possibly showcase some of those stories within our exhibit spaces, both digitally and physically. So I'm going to get started on the Curran story today. All right. Now, Curran, Illinois is founded by Isaac Curran. Well, it was named after Isaac Curran, and he was a Springfield jeweler who was kind of a man about town, and he knew the Matson family and was appointed in the 1840s as the Illinois Quartermaster General in 1862. In the 1840s. In 1862, President Lincoln named him the Curran Consul to Germany. Now, Curran was founded in the 1830s. It was quite small and started growing its population into the size of kind of a small village. It's still quite small today. When I went out to discover more about Curran, it really kind of merged into a neighborhood-like area, but you still see some of the facades of some of the older buildings there. And as you go through the town, you can see some of the rich history that Curran has laid out in its landscape. Now, here we have from the Sangamo Valley collection a map of the original layout of Curran. And as you can see, this is another one of those railway towns that we've been talking about. A lot of towns were built up in the midst of the railroad. And as you can see here, you have a variety of different streets that make up Curran, and you have two railroads that kind of split the town in half. So you have the Wabash towards the north end of town, and then you have the St. Louis Alton. And so it made it a great hub for those who are trying to ship produce north and south within Illinois. Now, the Curran post office started to be in use around the same time that the town was founded in the 1830s, around 35. The post office itself had its own building, and then right next to it was usually a grocer. You don't really see that in this image that we have here. But a lot of times when you look at the smaller towns here in Illinois, the grocer and the post office tended to be either right next to each other or they were in the same building. When we get to Springfield this Friday, when I talk about the post office there, it was actually inside the Tinsley Dry Goods store, which had a few names before it. The town hall originally was just a small building. Town halls were used to discuss politics. A lot of times it was a commercial building that was used for schools, for church, and any other community gathering that your town may need. But specifically, it was used mostly for schools and for meetings among community members. Mr. Lincoln spent some time in town halls when they were eventually created later on in his career. But most of the time, he ended up just stump speaking and standing on porches of homes, hotels, and pretty much any building that was sitting up a bit higher than the others. Now, we have a number of photographs within the Sangamo Valley collection that have been very helpful throughout my search in discovering more of what these towns looked like and the rich history that they had. And here is a group of the Curran School students who stepped out, and they're actually right next to the general store and post office. So the picture we saw a little bit earlier. And this is at the turn of the century, so a little after 1900 when this was taken. And as you can see, a lot of the pictures that I show you with school children, I mean, they took class pictures quite a bit, and you can get a sense of what the time was like based off of the architecture, but also by what the children, were wearing. And what's interesting about this picture is you have a combination of buggies to the left of the picture, and then to the right you have the introduction of the automobile. And so you get a sense of this town that is moving and shaping throughout its history. Now, if you look in some of the Sangamon County atlases and encyclopedias, you will find images of schools, and you will also find commercial buildings and a variety of community group pictures that have been taken over the years. This is one of the earlier schools called the Old Beaver Dam School. I actually had a kick out of what was stated at the bottom of the picture, because written inside the book, you'll see at the bottom of this image, it wrote that beavers would want a better home than this. So they're remarking of the state of the school. Given that this was an earlier one, this school looks in rough shape now, but when it was first built, it probably was in much better shape and housed quite a bit of children. But by the looks of it now, it doesn't look the greatest. Here you have the Curran School. Curran was in District 101. For those of you who are familiar with Springfield schools, the school now is called District 186. Now in Curran, there's been some schools that have remained, but some have also consolidated. As you can see in this image, the style's a little different, but the windows still look very similar to the earlier school house images. As schools started to grow, they started to expand and form the distinct early country school looks. Now, the Curran School District, this particular school was founded in 1917. As you can see in the bottom of the picture that I included the description of it. It was a modern one-room schoolhouse, which was quite common for that time. Now in 1917, to give you a good idea of the schools in the area, a lot of them looked very similar to this, but when you move into the Springfield area, in 1902, you have the creation of the Springfield High School, which is quite large. And so you start to see schools growing in levels, but also in separating the elementary versus the high school students. And so they called it primary and secondary schools. Now, at the bottom of the image, you'll see that it lists a number of the school board of directors that were on board. Board of directors helped pick the teachers who would be chosen to be hired to teach. A lot of times, if you're lucky, you will have a school teacher that will stay for a few years. But teachers tended to rotate quite a bit, especially if they were women, because as soon as women were married, a lot of times they would step down from their position. If you want to discover more about the Curran schools and the businesses within Curran, I encourage you to check out the public library here in Springfield and the Sangamo Valley Collection. They have a rich history of different areas within the Sangamo County area. But I also encourage you to look at the Sangamo County Historical Society's page, which is the Sangamo link. Now, to give you a better idea about, let me go back here. Okay, so as I stated earlier, what I showed you was kind of like a brief glimpse of Curran's past and what Curran can show us in regards to growth of a smaller community. Sadly, I couldn't find a whole lot about Curran. When I went to discover some of the interesting stories, it was raining, so not a lot of people were out for me to talk to in regards to what they know about the town of Curran. But I do know that the namesake was very well known within the Springfield area, but I was more interested in telling the community story. So what I was able to find was on the Sangamo link that I stated earlier to discover more. When the town was laid out, so the images I showed you of the post office and the general store, those were the first two buildings that were established. Now, the reason why I probably couldn't find a whole lot about Curran was because it wasn't formally incorporated until 2005, which I found very fascinating, because the same story can be told for another group of incorporations within the Springfield area that started off as little communities, but then were swallowed up by Springfield as it grew. Now, when the area started to seek financial aid to start working on its infrastructure, they were able to build like a sewer system, the water system, to make sure that individuals could live a little bit more comfortably. Now, we miss the special holiday in Curran. September 16th is known as Curran Day within the community. And the amount of time I've lived here in the central Illinois area, I have not heard of what the city of Curran does for Curran Day. So any of you who are watching who know about Curran Day and the events that have taken place either in the past or if they're doing them currently, do let us know, because I find that fascinating that they have a Curran Day. I know in Chatham they have homecoming, and Sherman and Williamsville have some homecomings as well for their town. But it's definitely something that is very unique to smaller communities. Now, if you are interested in the size of the population of Curran and are curious at why there's not a lot of information, it's probably because in 2010, the population for Curran was 212 people. So the village is quite small, and they eventually completed a comprehensive plan in 2012. But if you go to their website, you can't find the plan for it. So I hope they'll be able to make that public here in the future. So as you look at local histories, the best places that I've been able to find histories about smaller towns like Curran is by looking back in the histories. So the Historical Encyclopedia of Illinois, that particular book is quite thick, but it's an encyclopedia. So if you are able to look back at all the different incorporations, you can find the earlier histories. When I went to the town, there's not really a local library that you can go to. They tend to go to the public library here in Springfield. So you really have very few information. But one thing that the encyclopedia does state is that after the general store and the post office were built, you have this creation of schools. And before the school was built, the students went to the Chatham Township schools. But before the deep snow of 1830 and 31, they ended up moving some things around. Now, as you dive through the encyclopedia, you get a chance to see when the first churches were put in place. So you have the Methodists starting a church. It started in the home of Thomas Smith, who had private sermons within his front parlor. He also had classes that were put in his home as well. Two other churches, also known as Wesley and Mount Zion, ended up forming out of these front parlor churches. The first blacksmith shop was started by Thomas McKee in 1821, and he spent most of his time repairing guns. So if you look back in the records, it just shows him fixing guns and not really doing a lot of shoe repair or carriage repairs, because you had carriage shops that would actually specialize in that. The first frame and plastered house was built by Ebenezer Dove in 1839, and it was known as the White House. Sadly, there is no picture of the White House, but it is recorded as being one of the first ones. Also, one thing that I found very amusing was the fact that there was a cheese factory in Curran. So this factory started in 1878, and it was owned by John Workman, and it was pretty much the one factory that was in the Curran area. There was a grain elevator with the two railroads. Usually you end up finding grain elevators in towns that intersect with a railroad. And this village had two. And it was operated by Patterson and Richard. And then eventually Isaac French ended up taking it over. Now, as you saw in one of the earlier pictures that I had, which had the map of Curran, and you had two railroads that kind of, one was on the outside and one was cutting through. The railroads ended up being the Wabash and the St. Louis, Chicago, and St. Paul. Now, as you see in the map, as we saw earlier, those railroads would go Wabash going north, and then the St. Louis and St. Paul would head south. And at that time, you didn't have railroads going two directions. At the beginning, it was railroads would only go one direction and then head back. Now, the stations that were at these two railroad lines were one flagging station, and it was known as the Sanger flagging station, and that was for the Wabash lines. That was about 6 miles west of Springfield. Also, an interesting fact, Curran is the only village in the township that was platted by Thomas Moffett and A.J. Vanderin. And they plotted it near the northern line of the north quarter of Section 21, if you're familiar with the different sections of Curran and the township. Now, the plotting of the village with the different plots of land that were eventually purchased, those plots were designed by Mr. Fox, who also established the first store and served as the first postmaster within Curran. Other businessmen of the village included James W. Gibson, Noah Richards, J.W. Hammond, and C.S. Hotchkiss, and Joseph Dickerson, and Nicholas Powers. In 2010, I stated that the population was at like 212. Back in 1910, so 100 years earlier, there was a population of over 1,000 individuals living in Curran. So it shows how the population has definitely changed over the years. So small towns such as Curran has had their ups, their downs throughout history, but it still remains. It's still here. And that's an interesting point to always make, is that regardless of time passing and regardless of populations going up, down, and schools moving out of the township, the town still remains. And so there's always a bit of history still left there. So I am going to open it for questions. If you have any questions about Curran or some of the towns that we've already talked about on this journey. And I hope that you are able to have this opportunity to learn a little bit more about the Central Illinois area. There is a rich history here that still needs to be discovered. I know myself am learning along the way on these trips, the little pieces of history that tend to be forgotten. And also, it's always a lot of fun to see how Lincoln finds his way into these smaller communities, because it gives us an opportunity to see a great man be just an average guy traveling the circuit and visiting friends and visiting different politicians throughout the central Illinois area. But I think what fascinates me the most about these small towns is the buildings that are still there. They've lasted the test of time. All right. Well, it looks like we have a small group today, and I know that you have taken the time to watch this video, but I encourage you to tune in on Friday, where I think this episode might go a little long because we will be discovering the capital city of Springfield. Now, there's quite a bit of history in this town. It has grown. At one point, it almost winked out because of population going down. But like I said, it still survives today, and we are still growing as a community. And a lot of it is because of the rich history that this community has. So I encourage you to come back, check out Springfield, Illinois in our last episode of the Sangamo road trip. Also, keep in mind, we will have another episode next week for our hidden cemeteries discussion. We will have guest speaker Michael Moseley, who is from the SIU School of Medicine. He is in charge of the Pearson Museum, and he is going to talk to us a little bit about how different pandemics, sicknesses, and how doctors worked with the community and addressed their ailments, found cures, but more importantly, took care of the individuals within their communities with all of the knowledge and strength that they could muster. So tune in next time when we talk about Springfield, and come back and check out more videos from the Sangamo experience. So hope you enjoyed the show, and see you on Friday.